Good morning. I'm Representative Bernie O'Neill. I'm the chairman of the House Finance Committee, and we're holding a hearing today here in the Monroe County Office of Emergency Management on House Bill 2329, which is sponsored by Rosemary Brown and Representative Marcia Hahn. First of all, I want to thank Monroe County Emergency Management for hosting us. We truly appreciate it. I'm a former fireman. In fact, I grew up in a firefighter's family. My father was a chief for 27 years. I started fighting fires when I was 14. And my uncle had the coolest job in the world when he retired as fire marshal of Philadelphia. He got hired as the chief of the Coors Brewing Factory Fire Department. So we used to like to go visit him. So, but anyways, I want to thank everybody here today. Before we begin, I'm just going to ask the members to introduce themselves. And I'm sure there'll be some members coming in because I got some text messages that some members are stuck on the Northeast Extension and so forth. So I guess we can be down on the right there. Thank you. Oh, all right.
Representative Frank Ryan, 101st District, Lebanon County, Pennsylvania.
State Representative Tara Toohill, 116th, Luzerne County.
Rosemary Brown, 189th District, Monroe and Pike counties.
Marcia Hahn, 138th, Northampton County.
Go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry.
Jeremy Keel, Executive Director for Chairman Bernie O'Neill.
And I'm George Dunbar, Westmoreland County, 56th District. I get the award for coming the furthest.
Gee, I'm Mary Jo Daly. I'm from Montgomery County, and I have to say that Google Maps took me off of the Northeast Extension, and now I think I'm really glad. It was a beautiful drive up here. So, good morning.
Maureen Madden, 115th District, right here in Monroe County.
And again, I'm Representative Bernie O'Neill from the 29th District in the center of Bucks County. I want to thank everybody for having us here today. Obviously, my two staff members think it's still summer and they've forgotten what a razor is. And I don't see coffee in front of me, but I see Dunkin' Donuts coffee in front of them. So we'll be discussing their future salaries in about a week or two. So. I'm only kidding. I'd like to start with introduction of House Bill 2329. So I want to turn it over to the prime sponsors, and that is Representative Rosemary Brown and Representative Marcia Hahn.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members from the Finance Committee and guests. And I want to thank you for having the hearing here today on House Bill 2329, and it's known as the Taxpayer Relief Act. So, as most of you know, as we're going around our districts talking to people, the biggest issue we face in Northampton County is that we hear about is property tax elimination. People are losing their homes. They're on fixed incomes. They can't afford to pay their property tax. The other day I was on my way to a meeting and I go past the home of an 86-year-old woman. She's outside mowing her grass in 90-degree hot humidity, and I stopped to see if she was okay, asked what was going on, and she said she wanted to keep her knees moving, so her property's immaculate. But when I started talking to her, she starts crying because she had to pay her tax bill, her school tax bill, and she's running out of money. She's on a Social Security, on a very small pension. She worked in the garment industry for years, and she said, I'm just living too long. I don't want to lose my home. I love my house. I've grown up here. I've lived here my whole life. I take care of it. And the taxes are just forcing me out. So she doesn't know what she wants to do. And it's just heartbreaking when you see the people that are having to decide if they want to buy food, buy their prescriptions, they have to sell their home, what they have to do. They don't want to lose the homes that they've worked for their whole lives. I also see younger families who are renting apartments. They would love to own a home, but when they look at what their mortgage payment is going to be and what their property tax is going to be, they can't afford it. So they keep renting, and they would prefer to have an increase. And the ones that I've talked to would prefer to have an increase coming out of their paychecks so that they don't get that huge tax bill at the end of the summer. So, and the House bill that we've introduced, and I think Rosemary is going to go a little bit more onto what's in that bill, but a lot of times we hear about House Bill 76. So I know I was a co-sponsor. We did vote for it once as an amendment, and that went down 138 to 59. The Senate took a vote on it. It was tied 24-24. We can't get the votes on 76, and that would have eliminated the property tax on all properties. Since we can't get the votes, we've been talking about different things. Representative Brown and I, along with Representative Heffley and others, are on a taxpayer caucus where we're discussing what's the best option. Well, when you have 10 or 15 representatives in a room, you have 10 or 15 opinions on what the best option is. So Rosemary and I were talking and came up with a plan that we thought would work. And sometimes I feel anyway, when you want to eat an apple, what's the saying? The best way to do it is one bite at a time. So let's start with something we can get the votes on. Hopefully this will be it, so that we can eliminate on the homestead, farmstead properties and get some relief for the taxpayers, and then go from there. So the voters that recently approved the budget measure allowing 100% of the value of the home to be excluded from the property tax, up from the 50%. So our bill would allow the school districts to pass a referendum to allow that to happen. So I know there needs to be work done on this bill. As most members know, we have very few session days left, so I don't think anything's going to happen this session. But what I'm hoping is we get feedback, comments, and concerns about the bill, things that we need to do, that we can tweak it so that we can get the 102 votes, so that we can start next session off and running and hopefully get this done. It's also been brought to our attention as we're talking to other members, they want to see it done locally, so that each school district do something and raise the tax. So I'm anxious to hear from the testifiers today to see what the testimony is, their feelings on it, and again, hopefully we can do something to amend it if we have to be able to get the vote. So that's my goal for today, is to get a good feel from the testifiers and the members of where we go from here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Chairman O'Neill, members of the Finance Committee, colleagues and guests, and welcome to Monroe County and the 189th District. So I thank all of you for being here today to further discuss House Bill 2329, and as Representative Hahn gave you a little insight to the bill as well. This is a very difficult issue. As many of you know, it's not something that, it's been a 20-year running conversation. And as I was walking in today, we were talking a little bit about 20 years, and if it was that easy, we would have this solved. But this is a very difficult issue, but something that for the district that I represent here is the prime importance for people. On November 7th of 2017, an amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution was approved by voters to further provide for the expansion of property tax relief program known as the homestead exclusion, which Representative Hahn mentioned. The people of Pennsylvania, I believe, sent a very, very clear message and a signal that there continues to be an issue with property taxes and the level of them, and they want relief and desperately need and deserve that relief. So the vote overwhelmingly passed in the region, and as a quick reminder of the breakdown of the vote, Monroe County passed that constitutional amendment at 82.5%. Pike County, another section that I represent, passed it at 62.25%. The statewide vote was 54%. As you know, anything over 50% wins. So by this amendment passing, it increased the allowable homestead and the farmstead to 100% of the assessed value that we can offer. Is it fully funded? If fully funded, this could change and could allow school districts to eliminate the collection of property taxes within each school district. So since the passage of this constitutional amendment, there have been many discussions, as Representative Hahn mentioned, regarding the best way for the General Assembly to craft enabling legislation that would provide for the elimination for primary residential school property taxes via the homestead exclusion. So basically, how can we help fund this measure for primary homeowner relief? So in response, Representative Hahn and I are sponsoring House Bill 2329, also termed the 100% Property Tax Exclusion Program. So it would allow school districts to exclude up to 100% of the homeowner's school property tax bill. Our bill would provide the funding necessary to do this by increasing the state's personal income tax by 1.89% to cover the amount needed to satisfy and offset the primary residential school property taxes. So we're looking at about $8.5 billion to $9 billion that we need to generate to give the elimination for primary homeowners. So currently, our PIT is at 3.07%. The increase would take us up to 4.96%, which is still below 5% and still much lower than most surrounding states for us as well, which I think is an important piece to remember. So while there have been many tax shifts and replacement proposals to reduce or eliminate taxes, we believe implementing a small increase to the PIT is really the best approach to relieve the current tax burden on homeowners while giving our schools the stability that they need towards education funding. And I know we have John Callahan testifying from the PSBA. And I think we are also very concerned that the schools have this stability with education funding. That is a priority and it is important. So when we're looking at these proposals, we have to look at the importance of that, but we also have to look at balancing the needs for residents in the area as well. So the PIT represents one of the most stable taxes levied in the Commonwealth. So if you review the pre and the post recession reports, the PIT is less variable and it remains one of the most stable, second to property taxes, real estate taxes. So we introduced 2329 to help owners stay in their homes and offer a funding mechanism. So I agree that no tax should have the power to take away someone's home. So I'm gonna pass through I'm a little lengthy here, and the chairman's gonna yell at me pretty soon. But 76, he knows how passionate we are and how much we need this and our concerns for the area. But Representative Hahn did mention House Bill 76, which was the full elimination. I support that. I'd love to see that. We voted for that, but we're looking at a measure that we can help rally and get more votes in Harrisburg to offer our homeowners some relief. So with that, I'll skip the rest of it and thank Chairman O'Neill again and all of you for your time here today. And my goal as well as Representative Hahn's, and I think the rest of the legislative body, is to get great information, good feedback, things that possibly we may not be thinking about with this bill. We want to make it the best that we can make it, so that we have the best chance of seeing this move through the process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Before we move on, I neglected to ask everybody to make sure you silence any electrical devices you have, cell phones or pagers or whatever. So I would appreciate that because we are being filmed and taped. I've been asked to adjust the testifier scheduling. So we're going to move the realtors up, and I believe Jack Newland, is that his name? Is Jack here? Are they here? Jack? And I believe Bob Kelly's joining him. Is Bob Kelly here? Wait, oh, yeah, come on up, gentlemen, right here. That's what. Gentlemen, for the record, since we have a stenographer, if you would please identify yourselves, and then Jack, you may begin.
My name is Jack Milhon. I'm a 50-year realtor here in Monroe County.
Bob Kelly. I've been a realtor in Monroe County for 14 years.
Jack, go ahead.
Good morning, House Finance Committee. Welcome to the Poconos. Thank you for allowing us to testify this morning. I've been a licensed and active real estate broker in Monroe County for 50 years. When I started my career, the county was primarily a summer family resort area. Most of the resorts opened on Memorial Day and closed on Labor Day. When potential vacation home buyers would look at a property and ask me how much were the taxes, I would tell them, and they would say, "Is that a month?" And I said, "No, that's a year." Well, things changed. Taxes started to increase. The family resorts could no longer hold on to their property, so they sold off, as the camps did, and they became housing developments. Well, that created another problem. For every student, the average cost in Monroe County is about $12,000 a year, with the exception of special needs students, which can be considerably higher than that. The cost locally is somewhere between $14,000 and $17,000 for a school district based on special educational population, English as a second language, and so on. If you look at 2 children in a home, the cost of their education could be approximately $28,000 a year. If that home is paying $8,000 or $10,000 or $12,000, there's a negative. So each time a new home is built, it becomes a greater burden. The family resorts and the summer camps could no longer pay the higher taxes, so they sold their land that was subdivided into houses. The family resorts are now a thing of the past. We had a number of them, Mountain Manor, Penn Hills, Birchwood, they're all gone due to the high taxes. Now people are losing their homes to higher taxes. We have approximately 150 foreclosures every month in Monroe County. They're sheriff sales where people can no longer pay their mortgage payments and pay their taxes. That has been going on for 10 years. Next week, September 12th, is the county tax sale. As of this morning, there are 1,200 property owners losing their homes in Monroe County. They're scheduled to go up for tax sale next week. Some of that list will shrink. Now, to get on your tax sale list, you have to be 2 years behind in your taxes. So people can somehow scrape together a few dollars, pay 1 year's worth of taxes, or work out some type of financing plan with the county tax assessor, but that doesn't solve the problem because next year they're back in the same situation. I can tell you of situations, I know of one particular one, a World War II veteran, and his wife had a 14-acre homestead. They were too proud to put their property in clean and green. They were living on Social Security. They were forced to sell their home. He's now dead. She lives in a 600-square-foot bungalow. That's not the America my parents came to years ago. Open space has been a hot topic. Every time a property is added to open space in Monroe County, it comes off the tax rolls. We have the Tox Island National Recreation Area, the Cherry Valley National Wildlife Refuge, township parks, county parks, all of that comes off the tax rolls and the burden is left to the remaining taxpayers. Stroudsburg is the county seat of Monroe County. Every time the county buys a property in Stroudsburg for courthouse expansion, it comes off the tax rolls. Recently, the county needed more office space. They bought a building on Main Street that was paying $65,000 a year in taxes. That is now off the tax rolls. We have the same situation in East Stroudsburg at the ever-expanding East Stroudsburg University. Again, every time somebody takes a property off the tax rolls, the burden falls on the remaining property owners. I know of a case where a young family bought what we would call a townhouse or a row house in East Stroudsburg. They put down a down payment. Their monthly mortgage payment is $450 a month. In 15 years, they'll own the home. But their monthly tax payment is $600 a month. I didn't get that backwards. Understand what I just said. $450 a month mortgage payment, $600 a month tax payment. When their mortgage, if they pay it off, their real estate taxes continue. Another example, not only on the residential end of it, there's an office building known as 100 Plaza Court, just outside of East Stroudsburg in Smithfield Township. It is half vacant. It has been half vacant for a number of years. The real estate taxes on that were $38,000 a year. The county decided to reassess that. In 1 year, the real estate taxes on that building went from $38,000 a year to $102,000 a year. That man is up against the wall. What does he do? The taxes go on, he can't rent the building. He would have been here this morning, but he has a business commitment outside of town. State grants to study butterflies, walking around money, All sound good, but real estate owners need help, and they need it now. Kicking the can down the road will not help. We're near the end of the road. The real estate owners are carrying most of the burden. You have to find some other way to do it. The horses pulling the wagon are being killed off one by one. The remaining horses can't keep pulling the wagon. Real estate owners need help. I beg of you, please do something. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you all for making what in some cases was a long drive here. We really appreciate it, and I think as Jack has mentioned and you all are aware of, while many counties now, as it's a spreading issue, experience this, Monroe County has sort of been the epicenter of this over the past 12 to 15 years. A little about my credentials. I have been a real estate agent in Monroe County for a little over 14 years. Prior to that, I was in corporate America and lived throughout the country in states with 0% tax, Florida, and where I was lucky enough to pay over 10% of income tax, California. So I do realize where we sit in the PIT, and through real life experiences, come to realize what has happened to Monroe County with some of these, the inequities in property taxes. Credentials real estate wise, I have been one of the top agents in this county for 7 to 8 years. I'm in upwards of 200 homes a year, and I see the real life stories of these effects. As I mentioned, this used to be more of a Monroe County, somewhat Pike, and a lot of York County issue years back. Now it is spreading throughout the state, and because of the increases in expenses, it is becoming something that is putting people out of their homes in all areas of the state, not just the border counties, if you will. This is an independent statement. I'm not here to represent PAR or any of the official bodies. This is just some real life experiences that I lived through in this county. To Jack's point about the mortgage versus the tax payment, that isn't an isolated issue. When I have myself or my agents out in the field selling properties, this is upwards of 50 or 60% of the properties today that we sell. Your monthly payment will be more in state property tax than it will be in your principal and interest to your lending institution. That seems a little upside down. While I agree that House Bill 76 was very important, and it would have spread the equity out much more fairly, because this bill, while a big help, won't do a lot for renters, and obviously that's a problem in some of these high-cost areas such as Monroe County. But it will be a start, and it will be a help. I'd like to take a minute and give a real-life example of a home I went into. A young couple, both with graduate degrees, had gotten into the American dream. They bought a new home in Monroe County. When they moved into the home, their taxes were just over $6,000 per year, their property taxes. About 9 years into owning the home, they had contacted me to come over and see if there was a way to either help them find a way to save their home or to sell it. The house was upside down because of the economy. However, what really just boggled my mind was the fact that their county tax, total property tax bill at that point in time was over $12,000. It had increased about 105% since they had built this home and moved in. They were living in one room of the house, using an electric space heater to stay warm with their cat, while one commuted to New York to work and one worked locally. To just back up some of the statements from the representatives as well as Jack, that unfortunately is not a way that anyone should be forced to live that works every day. The last point I would just like to make, which has been going on for some time, is obviously the Hold Harmless Act. There is one simple fact in education. When you're educating students at your school level, doesn't it just seem to be common sense and fair that every student in the state of Pennsylvania should have the same allotment coming from the state to help that student become everything they can be? And with that, I will relinquish the time and say thank you again for attending.
Thank you. Before we move on, I just want to point out that we've been joined by Representative Kovulovich. So welcome, my friend. I have a couple questions, but before I go on to either the prime sponsors, how many questions? Okay. When you're referring to the taxes and the tax bills you were saying, are you referring just to school taxes or the total tax bill, real estate and?
County and borough taxes, in my opinion, are fair. I understand everybody has to pay taxes, somebody has to maintain the roads and so on. The school taxes are the killer.
Right.
We can live with the county tax, we can live with the borough tax. The school tax we can't live with.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to make that
And
clear.
just to add to that, Representative, the example I made was 100% related to school
School
tax.
taxes.
Yes, it was the school tax raise alone that doubled their tax rate.
Great, thank you. Do you know what the average school tax bill is in Monroe County by chance?
When you say average, on the average residence or?
Yeah, on the average resident by all the school districts, if there is such a number, I don't, anybody? That's fine if you don't know it. I can
That's a
always get it.
difficult question to answer. The straight answer is too high, it's too much, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they're ever increasing.
Right. Now, I understand, I understand the problem probably a lot more than a lot of people don't live here, because we had the same issue for years in Bucks County, and I have a property up in Albrightsville, in Carbon County, and I see some of my neighbors struggling because they can't sell their property because they're paying a pretty high tax now, but the issue they're running into is when they sell their house, the new homeowners taxes are going to go from $2,000 to $14,000, and it's become a real issue.
Yeah,
We call it sticker shock. People look at a house, they like it, and they, oh, by the way, how much are the taxes? And
Right.
as soon as you tell them, it looks like you hit them with a wet mop. They just
Right.
go into shock.
Yeah.
I will add that I do have a little bit of ancillary data to that. Based on last year's home sales, which we had just over 2,000 in our county, total taxes were approximately, on the houses that sold, so it's a representative number, total taxes were approximately $9,600 per year, of which,
Wow.
depending on your school district, runs about 68 to 76, 78% of total taxes. And we do not, unlike Carbon County, we do not reassess here. So one of the interesting points is a home that sold for $700,000 back 10, 12 years ago. Perfect example, $800,000 house. It's on the market right now for $419,000. The total taxes on the house are $24,000 and change. So to Jack's point, that's when the phone rings, you tell them that, and 30 seconds later, you're off the phone.
Right. Wow. And one last thing, you referred to that you didn't think this piece of legislation was fair to renters. Were you referring to the tenant or the landlord?
The tenant more so, because they won't see as much relief on it.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Representative Ryan. Oh, round, okay.
First of all, thank you very much. And I want to have a couple questions, and then I just wanted to make a comment if I could. The Independent Fiscal Office prepared a report about 5-6 months ago that indicated if the property taxes were eliminated, home values in Pennsylvania would increase by approximately 10%. Now, obviously, other things would be changing in terms of the PIT. Would you agree with that assessment, that property values would increase without the school property tax?
The property values?
The values of the property would increase. So in other words, let me give you an example. If you're going to buy a home and you're going for financing the bank, in looking at your affordability index, will deduct from that any homeowner association fees or any property taxes before determining what your mortgage would qualify for. And then as a result, it has a downward pressure automatically on the value of what you could possibly afford. So it reduces the demand curve for the home. So the independent fiscal office's perspective was that home values were negatively affected on an average by about 10% because of the way the Commonwealth taxes. So my question for you would be, if school property taxes would be eliminated, would you see or expect to see an increase in home values?
Yes, I think so. Using the example Mr. Kelly used, with these taxes being $24,000 a year, several months ago my wife was leafing through Malta List and saw a house, and a rather large house, and she said, "Boy, this sounds cheap. Why don't we go look at it?" And I said, "How much are the real estate taxes?" And she said, $22,000 or $23,000 a year. I said, "If you gave me that house for nothing, with the condition I had to stay there and pay the taxes, I wouldn't take it."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The second question I have for you is, yes, sir.
Representative Ryan, could I
Please
just
tell
add
me.
to that,
Yes, sir.
please? The solid answer would be without a doubt.
Thank you.
There was a study done for PAR regarding House Bill 76, and that, of course, it's a different bill. It would have eliminated all taxes. In Monroe County, the number that they said was a 28% increase overnight. But these houses that we use as examples, the one for $24,000 in taxes, the school taxes on that, I believe, were $18,000 and change of that. And that home, if it would be me marketing it, with $6,000 to $8,000 in total property taxes as compared to its sister properties in, say, Sparta, New Jersey or somewhere, that home would be on the market for $500,000 or $550,000, and it probably would be under contract in a matter of weeks, not months.
The second question I have, and then I'd like to make a comment, and I applaud the makers of the bill for this initiative. With the homes, as an example, in Luzerne County, there's 2,500 homes going for sheriff sale in the next 2 weeks. Monroe County, it's a fairly big number. You and I have never met before, but I'm an expert in keeping companies and individuals out of bankruptcy. I helped orchestrate the work with Northeastern Bank and First Eastern Bank that collapsed because of the Wayne Newton bankruptcy that got absorbed by other banking institutions. I've been a CFO of a publicly traded bank. So, and I'm brand new at doing this, so I have very limited experience as a legislator. So I make this comment in this context. When you have a sheriff sale, does that adversely affect the comparable values of property for appraisals of property in the area that you're dealing with that could put downward pressure on the ability of someone to sell a home in your county?
Yes, I mean, you go through a community, and if half the block has homes either sold at sheriff's sale or tax sale or up for sheriff's sale or tax sale, that's obviously going to affect the value of the rest of the neighborhood.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
We have a bill, and I would mention, in light of this bill being done, I saw it and I thought it was a great initiative. I've implemented House Bill 2548, which precludes a municipality or school district from selling a home at less than 80% of the fair market value on a sheriff's sale. And it's going through the Urban Affairs Committee right now. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. My last comment I want to mention to you. I ran for office for one reason only, and it's to eliminate property taxes. I do bankruptcy for a living. I'm an expert in economic warfare from the Marine Corps, and I can assure you, if we don't get rid of this onerous tax, it will destroy the cities and the counties that we deal with across the board. We're seeing a mass exodus of citizens from rural areas in Pennsylvania to outside the state. We're losing working families because of our tax code. We need to do this. I've got a different bill, a version, the House Bill 76 that I've worked with PASBO and other areas on that I would like to show you. But we need to do this as an interim, and we have to stop screwing around. We have to get it done. One of the worst things I can tell you that's going to happen, if there's a life event for a senior citizen in this community, in this county, and in this state, in which they lose a spouse and the income drops from Social Security, you have just also put that person out of their house. It's immoral, it's unconscionable, and I will not, as a Marine, allow that kind of conduct to continue. And I thank you for doing this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Daly.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here. Mr. Kelly, I think I heard you say, and you can correct me if I heard it incorrectly, that Monroe County doesn't do reassessments, but that Carbon County does?
Yes, Carbon County, and pardon me for not knowing the technical name, but Carbon County School District does reserve the right to do spot reassessments when a home sells. Understanding they don't do those when houses sell for less. They do it in circumstances where a home may have been gone up in value, or if a lot of work has been done to it. Monroe County does not have that same bill. Not that we need to because of the high tax rate.
Okay, I was curious because I am also a member of the Local Government Commission, which is bipartisan and bicameral, and we had a workforce recently that worked on providing tools to counties to do reassessments because and so I was going to start by asking, do you know when Monroe County did a countywide reassessment?
Actually, Monroe County right now is in the process of wrapping up their countywide reassessment that was begun 3 years ago.
Okay.
And while that may seem to, on paper, on the front end, seem as an equitable way to address this, the unfortunate situation is the example I've provided today of the house with $24,000 in taxes because it's a newer, more grand home in a much higher taxed area. That, as things become somewhat equalized, is really going to put the burden back into our downtown municipalities, the older homes, which consequently are owned more so by senior citizens. So we are going to see it equalized to a degree, but I think this is just a personal feeling, I think we are going to see this result in some tough times for those living in older homes in our downtown locations.
So one of the goals was to provide counties with improved tools so that there would be more fairness and more transparency about how these were done across the state. My county hasn't been reassessed since the early 1990s. And so it's just one of those things I'm interested in because I do think that in the long run, if the reassessments are done on a more regular basis, because there's always a rebalancing then of what the properties are. And it's one of the difficult aspects of it. But if it's done more frequently, there could be benefits to it. But I don't want to get into a big discussion about that.
I could not agree with you more. And
okay.
Just for backup information, the last reassessment done for Monroe County was 1989, and we had gotten up into adjustment ratio values into the 40s, which of course is...
What can I comment on?
Which is why the spot assessments end up coming up and as a tool for the school boards, I think.
Let me comment on the new reassessment. Our county commissioners, when asked what's going to happen, answer the question this way. A third of the taxes are going to go up, a third are going to go down, and a third are going to stay the same. But they borrowed $6 million to do the reassessment. Do it, figure it out. Nothing really changes other than the county is now stuck with a tax or a fee of $6 million to pay for the tax reassessment. A third go up, a third go down, a third stay the same. The horses are still pulling the wagon, but the horses are slowly being killed off.
Okay. It's useful information, though, to understand when the reassessments were done. And I think that part of the idea is with technology today, reassessments could be done more easily because of all of the different tools that are available, and that there would be less of that fluctuation. So that's just, it's a theory. I think that it actually has legs. And I think that the expense of doing a reassessment is pretty big, which is part of the reason that as a local government commission, we looked at it as a way to give the counties better tools so they weren't just out there on their own and it would be more uniform across the state. The other question I had was, do you know what the current homestead exemption is for Monroe County in dollars?
The current rule for exemption?
The homestead exemption. I mean, I'm assuming that there is there is an ability to have a homestead exemption now up to 50%. The constitutional change would move it up to 100%, but there has to be laws enacted in order to do that. But like when I get my property, I went and in preparation for this, I went and looked for my own tax bill just to see, because what the
But again, it's smoke and mirrors, because somebody else has to pick up the difference what somebody else is not paying.
well the
So-
current homestead exemption is being paid, I believe, by gaming revenues.
I,
And the counties get to split it out, and there's an amount. I mean, currently mine is, I live in Montgomery County, it's $226.05. That's it,
$226.
and 5 cents.
and I can get, and yes, and I can give you a real life example for myself, simply because I'm my primary residence. I did the math one day because I was curious, since the gaming money was supposed to do this. It amounted to 3.1% of my taxes.
I didn't do the math, but, I mean, my in Montgomery County, I live in a big school district. My taxes are relatively low, but my house, it's probably also the assessment. I live in a twin house. It's not a big grand place, but it's in a school district that spends a lot of money on its students. But I was curious. I was trying to put this in a perspective. It helps me to understand it from another county, which is very different than Montgomery County in terms of population and, you know, all in probably every kind of way that we could be different. So I do appreciate your.
It's not much.
It's not much.
I know you agree.
And I guess that's where it's like, so you have to really raise a lot of money to get up to the 100% exemption. So that's not a question there. That's just a statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Mine is $169, and it's less than 1% of my taxes. Less than 1%.
So
believe
much
me.
for that game.
Next is Representative Brown.
Real quickly, just to follow up, both of you, Bob and Jack, you mentioned that, you know, and I think this is the overall housing market across the country, you know, the value of the homes have been reduced. So when we do sell a home, or it's in a tax sale, or it's on a foreclosure, we're selling it at a better price, but the tax bill is still very, very strong. So I think, Jack, you might have said you couldn't give me the house. You know,
Gave me the house
right?
for
If it was a
nothing,
$24,000 bill,
and
right?
so I had to stay there and pay the taxes.
Right,
I
so you have a
wouldn't take it.
$2,000 tax mortgage for the year. So my question is, when, in your experience as realtors now in the market, and the house is a great price or a great deal, and the taxes are, I mean, I find most of the time when I talk with people, it's an $8,000 to $12,000 tax bill. You know, you're a 2,500 square foot home in a private community, or, you know, it's about $8,000 to $12,000 depending on where it is. But are you finding that when you sell a home and the long-term residency, is it affected by the fact that that tax bill catches up with them? So basically, I got a home at a great deal, but I still have this large tax bill. I think I can do it. But for 5 years or so, or 4 years or so, I do it, and then I say I'm done, and the house goes back on the market. Are you seeing repeat market sales, or someone buying a house, but the transiency is increased because the tax bill, you know, they think they're getting a great deal, but the tax burden just sits with them, and they think, okay, now it's caught up where I can't continue this tax payment. And then the house goes back on the market. Did I make that clear enough to you?
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, people come to the Poconos on a beautiful day like today, and they're willing to do the commute to the city for a good job. They want their kids to get a good education and be in a nice country area and so on. So they swallow hard and they say, okay, we'll pay those taxes. But then things change. All of a sudden, the weather changes. It's harder to commute. Maybe there's a job change or whatever else. And that tax bill is still there. So yeah, all of a sudden reality sets in and they're forced to sell that house or go back to the city. So there's a constant turnover. About 2 years ago, a local attorney who specializes in bankruptcy work asked me if I could help him out and do a couple bankruptcy appraisals. And I said, sure, I could do that. I did 1 or 2, and all of a sudden, within a couple of months, he was giving me 10 or 15 a month. I said, I don't have time to do these. People were going bankrupt. And it was the same case all the time. They got in the house, and all of a sudden, the reality hit of what the taxes were.
Yeah, and I say that because for the committee, I think the other pieces of being a legislator in our area is how it affects the community in the overall community, you know, coming together, the family structure, the involvement in schools. It affects everything. And so the transiency, the movement, the constant in and out, the lack of stability, I think affects so much more than just the financial pocket as well. So,
Rosemary, I would just like to add to that a definite yes, because while obviously principal and interest on a mortgage, 98% of the time in this day and age, adjustable mortgages aren't used because of the low rates, stay fixed for 30 or 15 years. Unfortunately, a person buying a house has no control over what a local school board enacts to spend. And I believe that the correlation we see that proves the question you asked 100% is the vast amount of foreclosures that we saw when some school districts raised school taxes almost 100% over a decade. Now, consequently, in the past, I'll use 4 years as 4 to 5 years as a snapshot, one school district in our county has actually lowered school taxes 10%, right-sized. Another one has been flat for 4 years, and another one lowered them 1%. So when you look at either a decrease or keeping school property taxes flat, I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen our foreclosure rate dip the past 18 to 24 months. My worry is at some point wages, benefits, and things have to drive those numbers up. And when we get into another one of those rising cycles, will that create the same situation we were in 6 and 8 years ago all over again?
All right, thank you. Representative Hahn.
Thank you. Bob, we'll address it to either one of you, but I think you mentioned about it hurting renters. But this is just going to be an opinion from you, and in theory, if I'm a renter and I'm trying to save money to buy a house, and you said about when you hear about these houses and then you hear, so I might have enough money saved for a nice down payment, don't you think that home ownership would be more affordable? The renters will be buying homes. The landlords are going to have to lower their rents because people will now be looking at owning homes. Like, do you see eventually that's going to catch up and then the renters will be able to have more affordable rents?
100%, absolutely. And the word hurt might not have been as appropriate as, or the statement, not help. But absolutely, it would increase home ownership. And one of the things that we need in our county, looking at it on a localized level, is the ability for workforce affordable housing. Because again, we're here because of property taxes and school taxes. And when you have $12,000 a year instead of $6,000 a year in those school taxes, it's pretty simple math to know that that adds $500 a month to someone's payment.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Representative Kavulich.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry I was a little bit late coming in. I agree with my colleague to my left here, Representative Ryan, with some of his comments, which is rare because we sit next to each other on the floor and we're always going at each other. But
that's never happened, so thank you very much.
Maybe I'm thinking too much into this, but as I'm sitting here listening, if we and we need to do something with the property taxes, because I've seen so many people come into my office, and it's heartbreaking to hear that people have their mortgage paid and just can't pay the property taxes. But do we create a problem, particularly in terms of border bleed, so to speak, or along the borders, if we have people, too many people come in because we attract them from other states, and then our areas in Pennsylvania can't handle things like infrastructure, or our communities just aren't prepared for an influx of people coming in from other states? Do you see that as being a problem?
That's a whole nother story, infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, people come here because it's a nice area and you know, they want a better lifestyle and so on.
Excuse me, you need to use your microphone, because we're
Sorry.
you have to use your microphone.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
They can't hear you.
People come here because it's a nice area, but they shouldn't be forced to leave here because they can't afford to live here.
Yeah, I will just add to that, to Jack's point, infrastructure is a whole different conversation that I'd be happy to sit in and have another hour to talk about based on our county up here in the extreme northwest. But to that point, in all fairness, I think it falls on to local zoning to make sure that things are in check for that. But more importantly, I don't see that we're talking about trying to attract people here with this. I think a lot of what we've been talking about, and I apologize, I did tell a story about someone that lost their home because their taxes increased, school taxes over 100%. I think we're more concerned with trying to minimize the risk of that. Would it increase property values, and would it make it more palatable for someone to buy a home who currently lives in New Jersey, especially with SALT taxes being capped, to come to Pennsylvania with lower school taxes? Well, absolutely. But I think our big concern that we see and live with on a daily basis are when these school taxes that escalated dramatically now have flattened off, we know we'll have to begin to escalate again, and what that will do to our population.
Great, thank you. Representative Tuhel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That kind of brought about a question for me. How many, what's your vacancy rate? Do you have a lot of these McMansions that have been built that now you can't fill with a homeowner? Is there a lot of kind of sprawl now that's vacant, or do you have a ratio of homes that are just unsellable because you can't get people in them?
The last Thursday of the month is Sheriff's Sale Day. Great Bear is what I would call an upscale golf course community. 3 of the houses in there went to Sheriff's Sale last month, and there are others. I mean, yeah, it's a problem, and it's not the mortgage payment. Mortgage rates are lower than I've seen in my entire career. It's the taxes.
Yes.
So it would be plausible then what Representative Kavulich is talking about, that houses like those then would be sold maybe to people from out of state that would decide, oh, we'll move from New York and make that commitment. That's where you've had the growth.
That was the point I made. And ironically, the house I use as the example with the $24,000 in taxes is in that same community. And the reassessment, to a degree, should help to equalize this. But between that home and one I carry that has $25,000 in taxes, for a nice home that's a brick construction house that sits on 2.5 acres, it just, you do the math, and when someone calls and they find out what their taxes are, they're just disinterested. And that house sold for $1.4 million 10 years ago. It can't even get a nibble at $750. It's just gone to $650, and it will probably take that house, because of that corresponding tax bill, to unfortunately go down into the fives potentially. And then to Jack's point, it all becomes a matter of, do they sell it for break even or take a loss, or does it then become another statistic on our foreclosure list?
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us today. It was good insight, and thank you for.
We're counting on
hosting
you.
us.
Don't disappoint us, please.
Lisa, I want to apologize to you. I have to rearrange the schedule because of timing for some of our testifiers. So our next testifiers are going to be John Callahan, a Chief Advocacy Officer for the Pennsylvania School Board Association, and Walter Schlegel, did I say it properly? Schlegel, who is the Superintendent of the Penn Argyll School District. So gentlemen, if you would come up here. And while they're coming up here, I just want to let everybody know that our dear friend and a member of the committee, Representative Lawrence, who traveled up from Chester County, has joined us. Welcome, John. Sure. We should go to lunch after this. Gentlemen, if you'll both introduce yourselves for the records, and then you may begin.
Okay, my name's Wally Schlegel. I'm the superintendent at the Penn Argyll Area School District. I've been with the district for 26 years, 25 of those as the business administrator, and becoming the superintendent this summer. So a little bit of a varied background, but there a long time.
Good morning, I'm John Callahan. I'm with the Pennsylvania School Boards Association.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here today and being given the opportunity to speak to you regarding property tax elimination. The subject of property tax elimination has long been a controversial one. I've been around a long time, and I've seen various proposals come and go, and for good reasons. It's a complicated issue with winners and losers, and I think every school district would like nothing better than to not have to raise property taxes again. No one likes asking their board to raise property taxes. The issue of the elimination of property taxes, in my mind, simply can't be looked at as a one-sided equation. You must first understand why taxes are going up, and you need to look at the issues really at the heart of the matter. I know it's popular for people to think that salary increases drive our budget. School districts do have salary increases, just like businesses, just like state and local governments. But in my opinion, the Penn Argyll Area School District's been able to control their salary increases over the last 20 years since I've been there. Our average increase in salaries have only been, what's been less than 2% over the last 4 years. So that's less than a 2% increase over the last 4 years. So we've done a good job controlling our salaries. The fact of the matter is that the budget at the Penn Argyll Area School District is driven by costs that I consider beyond our control, such as retirement contributions, special education, cyber charter school tuition, and unfortunately now, school security. We have had to put a lot of money into school security. We now have SROs in our buildings, in each of our buildings, and it has become a necessity. Taking, for example, retirement contributions, they accounted for the majority of the reason we had a tax increase 3 of the last 4 years. Since 2014, our retirement contributions have gone up by over $1.1 million. That's net. That's net of the state's contribution. So to put that into perspective, we have a $30 million budget. So now that the retirement spike's behind us, and you know, we adjusted our budget for that. We need help from Harrisburg in controlling certain expenses, and one of the ones that's always hard for me to swallow is cyber charter school tuition. In 2015-16, we paid $600,000 for tuition to cyber charter schools. We're now paying over $1 million. The Penn Argyll Area School budget for 2018-19, we would have had a zero increase. We were prepared to, but we had a large spike in both cyber charter school tuition, special education, and we absolutely had to add SROs. So the point I'm making is getting rid of the property tax. You know, it always sounds like a good idea on the surface, but until school districts receive the help in controlling certain expenses, we're going to continue to have a very difficult time balancing our budget. Before we replace property taxes with an increase in personal income tax or sales tax, you need to consider how school districts are able to generate the necessary revenue from real estate tax. The districts across the state are able to increase their millage rate based on a COLA type index. All right, and the school districts' indexes across the state can vary. The state base index for 2018-19 was 2.4%. Penargil had an adjusted index of 3.1, which allowed us to have a slightly larger increase in taxes than someone with an unadjusted base. The adjusted index is based on a school district's market value personal income aid ratio and allows school districts with higher aid ratios to have slightly larger increases in their tax rates. This permits districts to have who have lower wealth measured by the overall real estate and personal income values to have the ability to raise additional monies. I would hope that when distributing any additional monies that may be raised by the personal income tax and sales tax, that you take that into consideration, that the COLA type index stays in place, and also that you allow school districts who have higher aid ratios and higher needs have a slightly larger increase. And as I said, school districts are able to control their own expenses to the level of the index. However, to eliminate the property taxes and not tackle the other issues will have a dramatic impact on our level of service and programs we're able to offer. I'm very proud of the way the Penargil Area School District has been able to operate in a very fiscally responsible way. We've kept our buildings up to date, and we maintained a very good educational system while having one of the lowest rates in Northampton County and being one of the smallest school districts. That's very tough to do because I compare it to producing widgets. It's always easier to have a lower cost per widget the more widgets you're producing. So I'm proud of us, and we are one of the few districts in the state that is debt-free, and that's very important if you eliminate property taxes, because there's going to be a part of the property tax that remains in place to cover the debt. We are debt-free. So we did a very nice job when we restructured our debt a number of years ago. We looked ahead and realized that we weren't going to do what is considered a level debt. You keep it level or a wraparound. We wanted to get rid of our debt as quickly as we could, and that left us debt-free. So we're very proud of that at the Penargil Area School District about how fiscally responsible we've been to our residents. I get the other things I think you need to consider, and I know you probably heard many of these things, but there's going to be a cash flow situation that goes on. If the real estate taxes are replaced with the personal income tax, sales tax, most districts receive most of their real estate revenue by October, okay? However, if we replace the real estate taxes with personal income and sales tax, my understanding is most of the proposals, we would receive 1/12 of that distribution on a monthly basis. In other words, it would be equal throughout the year. That would leave us with about 36% of our revenue from that source versus a much larger source, well over 60 to 70% in most districts, the real estate revenue collected by October. So that could lead to some districts having a cash flow situation, and also there would be, of course, a reduction in interest earnings. I'm sure you've thought of this, but I would also consider the fact that if there's a downturn in the economy, personal income and sales tax is going to probably be impacted by that, and that would have to be thought out. The last one certain remainder item for me is that commercial real estate taxes, in my mind, if you do away with the personal income tax and sales tax, they should remain in place on commercial properties. That would allow districts to have COLA-type increases in their millage rates that for the commercial properties. That would help cover some of these expenses, such as special ed and cyber charter school, that we can't control. So, believe me, I have never cherished raising real estate taxes, and that's why we have one of the lowest in the county. So I'm very proud of that. But for me to endorse this, we would need those checks and balances in place. We would need to make sure we're going to be able to replace the real estate taxes with the same amount provided by the PIT and the sales tax. And also, I would ask you to use the same methodology in increasing that on a yearly basis. And I'm asking you strongly to consider cyber and charter school reform. I know we've talked about that forever. I don't know why it doesn't get moved. It's ridiculous the way they're funded. They don't have the same. If you look at the test scores, they're not as good as the standard or the traditional school districts, but they've been able to avoid reform. And I would ask you also to consider special education funding. I mean, there's nothing we can do about that when a child comes in and there's more and more children identified as special ed. You'll find that every year, and the expenses are very costly. So in closing, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And believe me, I don't envy your job in trying to come up with property tax reform. We would like nothing better to get rid of property taxes. So I wish you all the luck, and thank you again for allowing me to speak to you today.
Great. Thank you. John, before you go on, what area of Monroe County does your school district
Or
encompass?
Northampton.
Oh, Northampton.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're just over the mountain here. You could almost hit it with a stone. If you go down go down 33, probably 3 or 4 miles, you'll hit Penargil.
Okay.
Maybe a little
Wait,
longer.
what townships do you have?
We have Plainfield Township, and we have 2 municipalities. We have the Wingate Borough and the Penargil Borough.
Okay.
And it's a really nice school district. We have an awesome school district.
What's your population?
Our population is about 12,000. So we're not big. Our student population is about 1,500. So when
That's what I meant, your student population. When I, okay.
yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
1,500 kids.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Yeah. Believe me, I feel your pain when you talk about the charter and cyber schools.
yeah.
I have a target
Good.
on my back you wouldn't believe. John.
I will try to kind of go through slides. That's kind of more, I think, visually appealing, at least, if you take a look at the testimony. First off, thank you. I'm very, very pleased to be here. It's always actually a very good time actually to be in front of a committee and kind of talk to them and have discussions. So always excited about this. And I want to start off with, I have not heard from any of my members who ever said, actually, I can't wait until I get a property tax vote. This is something that we take very seriously. And when you're a school board member, you're paid really well for going through this, and you have to take a vote that in many cases your friends or neighbors are not going to be at all pleased with you. And then on top of that, you might have to fire a swim coach or something, and that gets even worse. So I think it's not an easy job, and we're faced with lots of pressures. So when I was looking at the property tax, and whenever we look at the property tax issues, one of the things I like to kind of turn back to and kind of say ditto to our super here is many of the pressures that school districts are facing, and kind of explain that as briefly as I can, and then kind of get into some of the other highlights of the legislation. And one of the things I'll say is House Bill 2329 does avoid many of the kind of pitfalls that other proposals had out there. When you put a COLA into legislation, you end up really with the other issues. You kind of counterbalance. You're not really dealing with some of the other issues when you put a COLA within the legislation itself for how much you're going to fund education, because the numbers don't work. And the original IFO report on previous bills kind of showed those facts. So I think you kind of avoided that, which was a good thing. But you still kind of have the same problems that we're dealing with within school districts financially. So I'm going to hop right into it and kind of go to education revenue sources, excuse me. You'll kind of see that I broke it up by percentage-wise. 63% from local, and the state is around 36%. That's changed over the years. I went all the way back to 1993. But you also see the total aggregate amounts have become significantly larger because of different costs within school districts. But you see that spread there that's kind of started to develop between the state and the local shares. And you'll see that also kind of our national trends with that. We have percentage of revenue from state sources. We're ranked around 46th, last in the nation for percentage-wise. But then when we have the local sources, we're about 6th in the nation. So we obviously have a lot more reliance on property tax. That's really what it comes down to, is that's where the shift has happened over all these years. I wanted to kind of show that graphically as well, where that is happening in the state, because there's so many people from around the state have different reaction. You know, legislators here have different situations, and it's clear by even just looking at this map. The greater share is in the blue of local revenue, and the lesser share that, more, I guess you could say, the school districts that are more reliant on the state share are in the darker green section. So you'll see on this map where that shift is across the state, and where, I guess you could say, the property tax issue really is more prevalent across the state. You know, and I'll just kind of anecdotally say, you know, obviously Forest County, they have more trees than people. They're going to tax, they're going to rely heavily more so on the state than property, because there's no property to really tax there. There's just trees, to be candid about it. Next slide, we look at BEF, and that's the state, the basic education funding. And you'll see conversely on that map as well. Less, obviously, in the white section, relying on the state share, and more so in the darker orange section, relying on the BEF for the state share. So I think you'll see the same problem with how the money is being driven out to state, you know, to the local school districts, which also kind of translates ultimately into the property tax issue as well, how much you're receiving from the state. So when you're looking at this, I want to kind of also give you that you've done some great work with the formula over the past years, and actually having a formula was a big step. So thank you for that. That was absolutely huge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will say, in 20 years, you'll see that these colors will actually kind of all become white. If I was kind of play this map out 20 years, the formula is meant to kind of adjust this so that, in essence, people are evened out as much as possible. Of course, it will take 20 years or more for that formula to happen. So kind of shifting perspectives. So I kind of went through the revenue. Go
And
ahead.
that's because of hold harmless, correct?
That's I won't call it hold harmless right off, but that's
Okay.
because it's based on what you received.
Just new money, right? Okay, thank
Exactly.
you.
So it's new money.
Yep.
So we're kind of stuck with that, and I'll leave that for another hearing that will probably take another hour. But mandated costs is a big factor when we're talking about special education. Special education expenditures are up 54% since 2007 school year. Special education funding is up by 6% in that same time from the state. Special education enrollment is only up 2%, which is even more interesting. And overall, public school enrollment is down 3%. So what's happening is our kids are actually in special ed are costing more, to be blunt about it. It's a mandated cost, and this sounds funny, but some school districts, you just don't know what you're going to have in the special education realm. One, my own personal district received a kid that was $120,000 a year just this year. So, I mean, you could have the explosion in that area. You can have not the explosion. But I guess you could say the overall trend across the state is those costs are going up exponentially. And I kind of show that in the next slide, saying that state special education funding has been going up, so I have to be very appreciative of that. But the next slide at the bottom of page 5 really kind of tells you the story. Our costs are increasing, which is that red bar, exponentially, but the amount that you're getting from the state and the Fed is pretty much staying constant. It's irrelevant to the amount of costs that we're receiving from our special education population. And there's nothing against special education. I'm very involved with that myself, but it is just a fact that we're dealing with. And this is probably one of our bigger resources of our spending problem. Now, when we talk about mandated costs, this is a really interesting section as well. I mean, I took, since 2011, I looked at all of our costs across the state. Well, when we kind of took out our pension line item, which is up by 337%, I took out the charter line item, 61%. Increase over that time. And then we looked at salaries, and actually teacher salaries and salaries overall were down by 3% at that time. So you'll see that school districts are controlling the salary side of it. And all other expenses in our line items were up by 6.6%. So you can see the kind of control of the cost, but then there's also the mandated cost that you have that, quite frankly, you have to pay. You have no choice. This is where the problem is. So when I looked at pensions, and we kind of took that factor, we looked at pension overall increases over the years. And then we'd looked at state revenue increases, and I put them right next to each other. Every year, and I'd first like to preface this and thank you for making the investment in education all these years. We have the sucking sound on state school district budgets, which is our pension bill. You know, so the difference was we were actually in the hole every year by 92 million, 165 million over those periods. And obviously, when you see those red bars down the bottom, that translates into property tax increases, that or cuts, or some sort of other kind of change within a school budget. So while there was an investment by the state, it didn't really it didn't even match one of our biggest cost factors, which is this new pension problem. I wish I put in the slide that said where the pension percentages per employees are going. Right now we're at 32.57 of an employee's salary. And this is no reflection on the pension, all the problems in the past and where the problem is. It's just a reflection of where we are right now on the pension system. We're going, you know, the last PCERS board meeting I was at probably a month ago, we are going to 40%. So the pension percentage that you must contribute per employee is going to 40% in the next 15 years. So it will continue to climb. This will continue to be a problem no matter what. So now that I've really depressed you, property tax as a percentage of revenue, I think, is another kind of heat map here, kind of seeing where property tax is being more utilized. And I think you guys know that because many of you live in those districts that are affected directly by it. But the local impacts of property tax, I want to kind of get to the Act 1 index, which kind of limits the percentage that you can increase your property tax. I wanted to kind of put that in perspective. We are limited within Act 1 about how much you can create or increase your property taxes by. But if I took the total amount that every school district could raise, and I put that on the red graphs here, so the last 15 and 16, 262 million possible dollars, and I put that next to pensions and charter increases, obviously that doesn't even meet that bill. So even with Act 1 out there, you still have a problem of underfunding or not being able to meet those mandated costs. And that's a challenge. And that means that school districts do all kinds of different things. I mean, school districts have become very inventive in the way that they've been creating revenue. I mean, from changing around their cafeterias to actually advertising. I was down in a school district and their entire team is sponsored by Under Armour. Good for Under Armour. But, you know, that's the school is being very creative about it. It was kind of cool, but at the same time, not something previously they did, but they're making revenue to, you know, offset this kind of problem. And kind of closing is being as quick as I can. You know, providing funding that covers at least the pension increase is very key to kind of recognizing some of the problems that we have with these mandated costs. Pension problem is not going to go away. I mean, we did do a great reform, and thank you for that. But the cost is still going to be there. So that's something we just have to recognize. We're going to live with it. We have a credit card bill that we have to pay, and we've got to pay it at this stage. Also recognizing that you want that mix of local tax sources plus the state tax sources. Shifting 100% provides all kinds of local issues. I mean, who really is kind of controlling where the revenue's coming, and that's always been a problem with previous proposals. This one, I think, still leaves that all intact. It does shift the current, I guess you could say, local revenue from homestead and farmsteads to the state responsibility, I guess you could say. But it doesn't really change the charts in the beginning where I said how much you're going to have from the state and local. You're just kind of shifting that percentage around. I really actually struggled with trying to show that a little bit, but in essence, you're just shifting that. You're still going to have that divide and some of the problem that we deal with our mandates. Predictability is very important for school districts. You mentioned kind of the timing of payments. You have to recognize the timing of payments for property tax as compared to what you would do on the state level for how you would reimburse or how you get that money back to the school districts. But you'd have to kind of really look at your predictability in the taxes and the revenue side. If the state was going to kind of take on this commitment, it has to be a commitment. You know, we had a budget impasse that went well over years at one point, and that was problematic for some of our lower income and challenged school districts. other school districts that had reserves were able to kind of pull on that and buy and work. So we will have that struggle as well. And I also, another issue that came up was the assessment system. We really, we've had some good work on the assessment system. I think there's 100 times more work to be done there, and that's probably a 3-hour hearing all to itself. But there's definitely a need for assessment reform in the state to kind of take us to the next level and deal with some of those issues. In that, I'll close and thank you guys for listening to me.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Before we go on, I just want to point out that we've been joined by a former House member who's now senator of this area, Mary Scavello. So thank you for coming. You're more than welcome to sit up here with us. The lights won't shine off your head. You'll be okay. Okay. Thank you. Real quick question. You talked about special education, and I'm a little more than familiar with the funding formula with that. In here, your mandated costs, and you have it, listed at 54%, 6%, and so forth. What is the impact of charter and cyber schools with that? Because I mean, I'll just, for the record, my school district, and I know what every charter school and cyber school gets for their special ed students. I also know how they increase their special ed population. My local school district has to send a cyber school that claims that only, and this is their own books, their own records show that they're educating a minimal special education student at what is now our tier 1 level, between 11 and 12,000, but my school district has to send them 27,000, which is more than double. And then they won't want to tell us where that money goes. What is the impact on that area right there, John?
I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but I'll tell you, because the formula which applies to new money, which was the new special ed formula, wasn't really applied to the charter side of the funding.
Which
we're
was
probably
not the commission's recommendation, by the way.
True. We're probably about $200 million of a difference per year on that. So, I mean, that's really where, because the formula isn't really correct with our charter colleagues, we have a discrepancy of funding.
Right. And for the records, for people who do not know, the reason why the school district has to send more than double is because you have to send the average of your total special education population cost, from the least expensive all the way to the most expensive.
Yep.
And you're not sending real costs, and that's why the Special Ed Commission recommended that the charter and cyber schools fall under the same funding formula. And I ran the numbers for probably 60% of the charter and cyber schools, and not one of them would be losing money. But it's interesting. So with that, I'll call on Representative Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony. First off, I wanted to commend both Representative Hahn and Representative Brown for their work on this bill. They came to me a few months back talking about the inability to get 76 passed and looking outside the box, and coming to me knowing that I have a school district in an area where property taxes are not a big deal. My end of the state, it's not as large an issue as it is here. For instance, in just looking at some of the numbers here, about 1.5% of taxable income in Monroe County goes to property tax, where in my district it's about 0.7%. It's half. So there is a huge difference. But they did think outside the box and come up with a product that can actually work in my district as well. There are so many variables. There are literally thousands of variables, and Mr. Schlegel, you pointed out many of them, and all these different hurdles that need to be cleared. And I appreciate that, but the end result is still this property tax is the one tax that can put you out of your home if you don't pay it. And so let's try to find a way to get to yes. That's what Representative Hahn and Representative Brown tried to do, is take all these variables and say, okay, we'll try and address all these, but let's find a way to get to yes. So my question, relatively long way of getting there, but my question really is that, in your opinion, John and Mr. Schlegel, is a tax, a personal income tax, an increase in a personal income tax, because of the inherent nature of property tax, where it's a stagnant fixed number, So every year, you know you're going to start with what you got the year before. You're not getting more unless you had a lot of new housing starts. Isn't a PIT tax, which is going to increase almost every year, probably every year, just based on inflation, isn't that an easier way to run a district as opposed to every year having to wrestle with your school boards making that ultimate decision of increasing taxes?
I think it would be, there certainly has an attractive measure to it. I mean, no one wants to raise property taxes. No one likes issuing that bill. Yes, absolutely, there would be that part of it. I can tell you in the Penargil Area School District, our real estate tax base has remained no increase to going down over the years because of, I know we had one of the realtors mentioned Cherry Valley Conservancy. We lost a large portion of taxes because it was taken over from the Water Company. They bought a large portion of the land. We've gone through, we have a landfill in our district, and they went through one of their parcels, was decommissioned, I'll call it. It was no longer useful. That was a $200,000 a year loss in revenue. So where I'm going at, yeah, absolutely, that would be attractive to us. But at the same time, there are things on the flip side that we need help controlling. And
I understand that.
I hate to sound like a broken record.
And it's been
but,
it's been an equally long process of trying to get cyber charter stuff under control and charter stuff under control and special ed costs under control as it has been to do property tax as well. But at some point in time, we have to put a stake in the sand and start saying this is what we're going to work off of.
And let me kind of be a little clearer. I think this bill moves a lot further down the road towards getting to that yes. And I still have to work it out with the membership as well. But you've dealt with a lot of the typical pitfalls that we've had since the Sam Rohr days, if you remember that. Sales tax, kind of, the movement in how that rate goes up with the economy and how much you'd be able to raise. We just kind of focus it more on PIT, which is a little bit more of a stable tax. So, I mean, you've dealt with those issues. You've dealt with some of the reimbursement issues, and you've even dealt with some of the ways that you would, replace the tax directly, and kind of avoided. I keep on saying pitfalls, even pitfalls concerning school districts that still have debt on their books, and how that you actually completely avoided that issue. So I think. This bill goes a lot longer way than previous bills.
Yeah, and I agree. And then you also have the extra added benefit of, like I said, it's a tax that can put people out of their home, as well as a PIT is a fair situation for those individuals on fixed income and seniors. One last quick question, and I also will hit on this with Schaefer from the CCAP whenever we get there. Do you ever sit back and when you're looking at your individual school districts, Mr. Slagle, do you look at diversification of your tax base as far as how much is business and how much is homes?
Yeah, we're like a bedroom community.
Okay.
We're very small.
I thought you were,
commercial.
which is very similar to what my districts are back home. And our biggest problem is diversification of our tax base, of not having a strong enough business portion, which also gets to this bill. One of the concerns I have with this bill is the pass-through dollars of PIT, the partnership taxes or S-corp taxes will still be increased, and it may force businesses out of communities.
Yeah, I just can't say enough good things about our school board and their ability to think into the future. When you talk about our real estate tax base and we're a bedroom community, the one thing that we did do is we have one township that represents the largest portion of our district, and we went with the farmland preservation, where we were if a farm sold their development rights, they went into farmland preservation. They received money for it, of course, but we agreed to freeze their millage rate. So what it allowed us to do is we realized that we were going to be giving up that portion of increases in the future, but we also realized that developments were going to be a much bigger impact on our costs than losing that. So our school board has really been able to look into the future and try to find ways to control our costs. So, we're doing everything we can, and I just think that sometimes school boards get maligned, and they certainly in Penargil have done a great job.
I think our job is tough. Yours is a little bit worse, to tell you the truth. Thank you for your time.
Yep.
Thank you. While we're in agreement over controlling special ed costs, I think people always forget, and John knows this as well, as you do, it's 99% of special ed costs are federally mandated.
Yes.
Which we have no control over, so it really puts us all in a bind. Next, Representative Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Schlegel, I just want to talk about, you were talking about the cash flow. So my understanding of how we have this set up, we're going to start collecting the taxes in January.
Mm-hmm.
We have that reserve so that in August, you're going to file your report with the Department of Education for the amount of money you would receive for property taxes. So some of us who pay our bill early and
Yeah.
get a discount, you'll now be getting that whole amount. Correct? I mean, so you're going to put in, this is what you get. You don't use the discounts for that. So you should be better with income for those of us that wouldn't pay ahead. So I guess I'm concerned about where the cash flow is for the school districts,
Right.
because you're going to get that money and then you're going to get a payment every month after that. So you should be okay with that cash flow.
Well, yeah, where I was going is we issue our tax bills go out in August. So most of our residents pay in the discount, which is October. So let's say we have, $13 million of taxes in by then, okay, tax revenue in by then. I don't think my understanding is we won't have an equal amount of personal income and sales tax by that same period of time.
I'm going to defer to Jeremy here for 1 second. So I'm looking at the chart here. But you're saying you're getting most of your money in the discount period.
Mm-hmm.
But we're giving you the full amount, not the discounted amount,
Okay.
in August.
The discounted amount is, 2% off of it. Yeah. So.
Okay, but you're still getting
Yeah.
that. I know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still.
I don't know. I've heard about 72, and I know House Bill 72. I think it was. We talked over 76. That there was issues with cash flow that we were going to receive 1/12. Let's just say if we collected $16 million in real estate taxes for the year, we were going to receive 1/12 of that each month. That was my understanding. Now I assumed that this was a similar proposal. I didn't do the research, but I'm assuming it was, which meant that obviously that would be less in my mind.
Yeah, I believe under House Bill 76, you are correct.
Yeah.
The way that we front-loaded the disbursements under this bill to try to deal with that cash flow issue. So, and we absolutely open to working to make sure that the cash flow issue works better than it might in previous proposals. But that was the goal in this legislation.
Okay, then, well, first of all, I'd apologize. I didn't read the proposal completely. I assumed that the cash flow was similar, so I would.
And
I'm
you're
glad to hear that. Let's put it that way. I'm very glad to hear that. You thought about that, because that was certainly one of our concerns.
And you're still getting the taxes from the non-residential, as you would.
The commercial real estate tax would, and I know there was talk about that, and I thought that was, I'm glad that was part of it, because, your bill is what you're proposing, and then between what actually becomes law is different. So I would encourage you to make sure that stays into place. I think it's only fair that commercial real estate properties still become taxed. I mean, we have a large warehouse, Marcia, I'm thinking, that is right off of 33, and it's vacant at this point. We get no tax dollars while it's vacant, even though
Right.
it's completed. It's kind of some of our school board members are like questioning, like, that can't be the case, but it is. But anyway, it's yeah, it would, yeah, and obviously that would help us out and help our residents. It would really
But
help.
I just wanted to understand. So again, in talking to, I just want to understand that you could, and you do a great job. This school board does a great job in Penargil as well. I just want to make sure you can live with that. So you will be able to make through, and you have a
We
fund
would.
balance.
We
if you-
would.
I know you don't want to
yeah.
borrow from that, but I mean,
No,
I guess that's
no.
the.
I under your proposal, I would not think we would have a problem. Certainly, under the others, I know some school districts will, because when we were unable to have a state budget there for a while, and some school districts were going through some cash flow difficulties, certainly around January. They were talking about closing. We were able to avoid that. Most of the districts were, because they had a fund balance that allowed them to make it through it. So, yeah, I don't think that would be an issue for us, but testifying that I can't say that to be the case for everyone, because I knew there were issues
No,
statewide.
I understand that, and I think the one thing, you know, that we're looking at is we're not trying to tell you how to run your school boards. You're doing everything the way you're continuing, or as you're doing it now. We're just trying to get the
No, I
way
appreciate
the
that.
money's coming to the school, and you know, and to help the property owner. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Kuvulich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I thought that light was on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schlegel, is or was Majestic the company in your district?
No, they are, I think they were originally in Bangor, which is my neighbor.
Okay.
And they moved to Easton.
Okay.
They built a larger plant in Easton, yeah.
No, because I was going to ask if that affected your school district's tax
No.
base when they left
That would
out.
have been, yeah, when they moved out, I'm sure that was
Yeah.
a hit.
Okay. Mr. Callahan, mandated costs, special education costs, special education expenditures up 54.1%. Does that include legal costs for school districts defending themselves against lawsuits when it comes to special education?
No, I mean, that line item within the coding from the Department of Ed is just the students and the teachers that are involved with that, not the legal end.
Okay, because I've heard a lot from school districts where that is becoming a burden.
An issue,
with
yes.
them, yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ryan, and I understand you texted my executive director and said you would keep it short.
I did, and it's only because I'm elderly.
That's what I'm here for, to keep them short.
I'm elderly. I don't have much time left. First of all, thank you very much for your comments. In terms of the IDEA Act, it requires contributions from the federal government, subject to formula up to about 40%. In the Commonwealth, that number has never been reached. What's the average that you're aware of that school districts are being reimbursed?
I'll have to check into that, Representative. I don't have it on the top of my head. I remember it was far short of what was promised.
Yeah, in my districts are where it's 13%, so I don't know what it is statewide. If I would ask you the question, are all the dollars that are mandated to be spent on special education as effective for the child as the educational institution might believe would be necessary? Do you have a concern that some dollars sometime are legally mandated as opposed to being in the best interest of the child? I know that's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, the federal law is in the best interest of the child. So, I mean, school districts with their IEPs.
I'll be
it's all
glad
an
to answer
individual
that
one.
question, Frank. One of the issues is sometimes there's a difference between what the school district believes is in the best interest of the child and what the parent may think or an advocate may think.
Right, that's why I bring it up.
And sometimes it goes to court, and then the court ends up forcing the school district to pay for things that they may not believe was, in the best interest of the child, but the court decided it was.
Like Chairman O'Neill, I have a special interest for children with disabilities. I walked across the United States for it, and I met with Senator Toomey's staff yesterday about crafting legislation to provide relief to the school districts to get up to the 40%. The question then came up about the efficacy of it. In terms of the pensions, in terms of the liability, I wanted to ask Representative Dunbar at some point, but we didn't get a chance to meet yet with the breaks. I was surprised on the comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR, that the state PSERS, the liability for the pensions for school districts is not on the state's financials. And when I checked it with the state's auditors and with the Auditor General staff, he said it's because it's not a liability of the state, it's strictly a liability of the school districts. I have not yet, my guru is Representative Dunbar and Jeremy Keel, so I haven't independently checked that, but when I checked with bankruptcy courts, what they told me, and this is still an up in the air question, so I'm asking you if you have greater clarity, is that the liability is 100% to school districts, and that if there was a bankruptcy of a school district or an Act 47, the funding differential would have to be made up by the property tax. Do you know if that's accurate or not?
I only know the beginning of your question, which was a bit ago under the accounting standards. That liability, the full liability, became on our books.
Okay.
That was controversial a bit because your liability tripled, quadrupled on your your tax filings. But at the same time, I think a lot of the actuaries and a lot of our banks that we work with kind of realized that it wasn't a quote unquote real number. They kind of looked at it and said, well, that's the entire liability. What's your proportion of that liability? So there was that adjustment. Now, I can't say bankruptcy wise for a school district because thankfully we haven't been in that situation.
Okay.
So I don't know the answer to that.
The one last question and a real quick comment. On GASB 75 required or mandated on June 30th, 2018 that the post-employment benefits for things such as health care be booked. Have you had any school districts yet get a magnitude of that impact on the financials, and that will that alter your budgeting and your needs for cash flow going forward as well?
For the healthcare line,
Yes.
your insurance line item.
That's
in
correct.
essence. I mean, you predict that every year you work with your insurance company, but I mean, overall, the increases have been less than what we were predicting, actually.
When you have to book that liability, though, have you seen a major increase in the amount that you have to book, or have you not had anybody that's been audited yet to have that impact yet?
I don't know that, but we can look into that.
Okay. And then the last comment is a comment. The school district's concerns for predictability are very valid and very real. But I will also say this as a business owner and a homeowner, the predictability of expenses for the homeowner equally is real. When our income varies and we have nothing but fixed expenses associated with it, the only thing that's going to break is us. And I would really encourage you to look at, so I'll give you one quick example. Traditions of Hershey was spot appealed by the Palmyra Area School District and was hit with an additional $120,000 assessment. I've now had 19 people come into my office from there saying that they are going to have to move early because they're running out of costs, out of funds, because their ability to pay the increased fees is gone. No business pays taxes. You either go bankrupt or you pass it on to the customer. So I would really encourage us to all sit down and work together to try to come to a resolution. I think this bill's a good step in the right direction, and that's my last comment. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Daly.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here. I always tell everyone, and I know neither of you are on school boards, but you certainly work with them, that school board director is probably the most difficult elected position that exists, at least in Pennsylvania. So thank you for the work that you do. I just wanted to, I don't know what the population of your area is, but one of the concerns I have about this bill, and I'm not discounting at all the need that people have, because I certainly have people who come to me about property taxes also in my district. But I think the idea of the inequities, I see inequities in it, because the commercial property owners would not be getting any relief, and that could include the S corporations that have real property, so they would have to pay their full property taxes, and renters would see an increase in their personal income tax, but they would get no benefit from a reduction in property taxes because they are not actually paying property taxes. And I mean, we worked up a couple of examples of what that could mean. So, and it hits, and I'm thinking of in my own area where I have a mix of high income individuals, high property tax properties, and also a fair amount of renters. And we do have a pretty strong commercial base. I don't know how that's broken down in terms of S corp or whatever, but you know, if you take, for example, somebody who is earning $200,000 a year, they would see an increase in their personal income tax they would see an increase in their personal income tax of about $34.40. They own a home that's assessed at $1 million. They would see a decrease in their property taxes of a significant amount. It could even be as much as $13,000. So they would actually pay $9,500 less in taxes. These are, obviously, it's hypothetical. But then you go down to a low-income person who makes $20,000, is a renter. they would see an increase in their personal income tax of $344. No difference in property tax because they don't own any. But if they're making $20,000 a year, $344 increase in their personal income tax is a big deal. I had somebody who made less money once who reported to me, and she said, yeah, that'll be a gallon of milk a week. But it's a gallon of milk a week that you may have, who knows how many kids they have or whatever. Yeah. But a commercial, a person who owns commercial property with income of $300,000 a year, property assessment of $400,000 a year, they could end up with a net effect of an increase of $5,100 approximately in increased taxes. And I think those are things that we would really have to grapple with in this bill because, and I understand it's the farmstead exemption, but those are just several rough estimates. And it seems like that's some of what concerns me because I think we all have high income, low income people. We all have properties. We don't have a great record of assessing properties in Pennsylvania in the different counties. And I think that, so you have high and low assessments, you have old assessments, newer assessments potentially. But, it's these inequities that I am concerned about with this bill because I think they could be, and I know that when you make adjustments to taxes, the realtor said before 30% would pay more, 30% would pay less, 30% would pay about, even. But I think we have some of that going on in this bill with the idea and of, like excluding. And I understand that it was the homestead farmstead exemption that was voted in as the constitutional amendment, but I guess I'm having issues with just how that would actually work out in terms of those kinds of inequities, because I think there are people who are probably going to be renters their whole life. There's, they may never be able to accumulate enough dollars to put down on, real estate that they would own personally. So do you see any of those as issues that either in all school districts or in your own school district?
Not with the commercial. I've
Because you
not
don't have
had
a
that
lot of
raised.
commercial.
No, we don't. We
Yeah.
don't. There's a couple of industries, mostly that's it. There's not a lot of mom and pops, which I think you were referring to.
Yeah.
No, but I know in our district, if property taxes are eliminated by the fact of the matter that we aren't going to have any remaining because we're debt free, we're probably going to be better off than most. This is a zero-sum gain. It's going to be the same amount of money generated, and I guess change is hard for everyone, and change is scary. And but when you have where I started out with is you're going to have winners and losers, and it's just a reality. I remember years ago, I think it was Act 24, we used to have a tax called the occupational assessment tax, and we took it to vote a referendum. And we were able to increase our EIT. School districts don't have PIT, they have earned income tax. So we had to go to vote a referendum. We hated the assessment tax, but it was a reliance. It had been there for probably, 30, 40 years, and people had had enough of the inequities, and we threw it on a ballot, and I couldn't believe it. We were able, let's just say the increase in EIT was approved almost overwhelmingly, knowing that some people were going to pay more, and there were going to be winners and losers in that, but we did a good job of educating our district. We held hearings, but that was sort of, I draw that as sort of a parallel. I don't know if it's an exact parallel, but it reminded me of it a bit, that you're going to have the same thing.
We are, absolutely. I guess in property taxes in my area, I live in Lower Merion School District. I represent Lower Merion School District, and I live there. Very healthy tax base, a lot of commercial properties, and and a lot of highly assessed residential properties. And so that's why I said earlier, my own taxes are not all that high, considering the school district that I live in. But I think that that's valid for probably a good number. But it's what concerns me as blowback from this also. And I guess the other part of it, if I could ask, it seems optional that school districts could opt into this, but are there any reasons that a school district would not opt into this? And then you would have, I mean, we have what, over 500 school districts, or at least 500 school
Probably
districts in
something like 500.
Pennsylvania with
I
incredibly different school districts.
I really don't see, depending on, the way that it's set up is for a school district to take action in order to
Right.
opt into it. So,
Yeah.
but I also don't see why that would be it would be pretty politically impossible not to opt into.
I would agree with that. I would think it would be, and yet would then school districts be really concerned that there would be the adequate revenues and the increases in revenues, because then you're going to have personal income taxes that would need to continue to be raised potentially, or would it be a loss of local control in how you actually fund your school districts?
In that way that the bill's set up, actually, I mean, even if the PIT didn't fill that pot up enough for what the demand was, the way I read the bill is that the legislature would be on the hook for the rest of that money. So it does deal with that. Now, the other issue that you speak with the different constituencies out there, from small business to large business and all those entities, I mean, that's not quote unquote my clients, but there are other entities out there to kind of speak better to that.
Okay. Thank you. I just, when I look at it, it's like I really understand. I mean, I have senior citizens who come in frequently talking about their concerns with property taxes. But I also, in some ways, see the benefits. And then I have to question that, the benefits of having your revenues based on property taxes. And does that add to this whole idea that it really is your zip code that depends on what kind of an education you're getting and what you can afford? And you spoke, I think, about the fair funding formula, that it's going to take 20 years potentially for that even to have an effect. And in the meantime, we continue to have issues with funding our schools. So this is a huge issue for me. And it's one, I appreciate the work that's gone into this bill, but I really have some pretty deep concerns about, I guess, how it would affect my school districts. And I'm also curious how it affects school districts across the state and taxpayers. Thanks.
Thank you. And although I agree with what Representative Daly said, I would, there's always flip sides to everything. And we always know there's winners and losers.
Yep.
And when I went through the Basic Ed Funding Formula Commission and the Special Ed, we ran into the same thing. But I'll use my district as an example. I have a community in my district that pays no taxes. And for 50 years, the school district has been educating the students. And who does that fall on? And it has been falling on the local taxpayer, the local homeowner, the senior citizen who has no children in school anymore or never had any children. So there is flip sides to that. So, someone actually, in my opinion, starting to pay a little bit towards the education of their own children doesn't hurt either. So the argument, is interesting. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. So first of all, thank you both for your testimony. And John, you're always such a great resource for us with the School Boards Association. And, the charts and everything that you gave us in regards to the costs and the drivers. I think no matter what, this bill or another bill, that is always going to be other things that we need to make sure we always focus on. And I think there's even conversations again with that charter bill, which is a good thing, which I'm in agreement with you on. So my question is, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. He knew it was going to happen. I thank you for being here, because I know you haven't, with your membership, gone through everything and vetted everything. So I understand that you can only answer sometimes in limited ways based on the membership. So, but I do really thank you, because you're valuable for us. Representative Dunbar did talk a little bit about the PIT and the stability. I'm gonna ask you that question as far as your thoughts one more time on the stability of changing the system, because I think at the end of the day, with all these comments going on, we want to change how we fund our schools to make it fair for both sides, more reasonable for both sides. So the stability on that in the long term with the COLA, and I appreciate your comments that you're saying that Representative Hahn and I have really, and with Senator Scavello, have also worked with trying to make sure that this is drafted the best we can to start with. And then, of course, we're looking at different things. And Representative Daly, I think the renter piece has been a huge piece of my concern, too. And I've brought that up many times. And I think we've also discussed the fact of increasing rebates and things like that for the renters as possibilities in the future, and looking at ways we can make this bill better for all, for many. It's just very difficult. The 76 proposal had everything in it, and it had the business, it had the renters, it had, and we couldn't get that at this point with the votes. So I think that's where you have to say, on a reality measure, we're trying to focus in and think out of the box and start with a piece of this that we hopefully can gain votes on and gain the support for the importance of it. So with that, I think that is something that we're looking at for the renter piece of it. Stability. I know you thought I was going to forget the question, but stability. What I wanted to hear maybe your thoughts, John, a little bit on it.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to stability of a tax base, I mean, the property tax is obviously pretty predictable and doesn't fluctuate. The PIT has gone up with the economy, and even in a downturn, as I recall, the revenue source was pretty steady at that stage. It did go down, but it was pretty steady, unlike your sales tax, which was fluctuated. And the PIT being a relatively low rate as well right now, it also increases in compliance with it. So just from my past life, people don't avoid the tax, unlike other states where you have a significant higher rate and people avoid the tax. So, it's a good tax to look at. There's obviously a lot more debate whether it's regressive or not, but I won't. That's not my area to talk about. So we would look to that, and we're looking at property tax. We've always been looking at the ability to shift this tax somewhere. In essence, that's really what we're looking at. This is a shift. We're taking from property tax to something else, which comes with its struggles that we've seen over the years. So PIT is a relatively stable tax to do that with.
Okay, thank you. And are you hearing anything from your members without a formal statement? Are you getting?
I hear, obviously my members don't like voting on property taxes increases. They would say, of course you need more funding from the state. That's one of the problems that we see in these charts. You need that increased funding to deal with these mandates, no matter what. And since this is a shift in equal dollars, you still have that problem to rely on. So I think overall, people, we've always been looking at these proposals and hoping that one actually comes out where the dollars work at the end of the day. When you look at, and I would encourage the IFO study to kind of back up those numbers with this kind of proposal. They've always been very relevant and very very true. I trust the IFO, and I think many people do with their assessments and where things are going. And when numbers work, I trust that they get them right.
Thank you, and I thank you for your focus for us on the several issues. I thank you for your feedback, and again, I thank you for being here and trying to have a very open mind with the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman John and Superintendent Schlegel. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate your taking time out of your day and traveling up here to testify. John, on your slides, page 3, and I have to say, I think particularly these heat maps I think are very useful. But on page 3, it says education revenue sources, and there's a chart. And it says percent of revenue from state sources. So Pennsylvania is there. When Pennsylvania is ranked against other states, does that number, that 36%, does that include the state's contributions to PSERS?
We pull them out.
All right. So I'm sure the superintendent, and I'm not trying to sound hostile here, but I'm sure the superintendent would love to pull Peasers out of his budget when he's talking about what the increases or the decreases have been over the years. The fact of the matter is that under 8 years of the Rendell administration, the state put $2.4 billion into Peasers in 8 years. In this year's budget alone, we put $2.2 billion into Peasers. And next year, it's slated to be $2.5 billion. So we'll put more into Peasers next year, the state, than Ed Rendell did in 8 years, and the Republican and Democratic legislators who enabled Ed Rendell. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I'm sure, I can assure you my superintendents back in Chester County would love to go back to the days of 2005 when they were putting 3, 4, 5, 1 year, 0% of payroll into Peasers. But as we're trying to come to some solutions here, I feel like it's disingenuous not to include the $1 out of $15 the state spent this year is going to Peasers. And I want to be very clear, it is not teachers to blame. Teachers have always kept up their end of the bargain with Peasers. It was the state and the school districts that shorted what they were supposed to put in. We have a governor's race going on right now, and I don't want to opine politically. This was the most serious issue. Peasers was the most serious issue facing the state 4 years ago when we had a governor's race, and neither candidate talked about it then either. I don't hear either candidate talking about getting serious about this. Until we as a legislature get serious about Peasers, until the governor gets serious about Peasers, this is the number one issue facing the state. The state has shown, regrettably, that it cannot be trusted to run a pension system. It has been underfunded repeatedly over the years. We shouldn't be on 401ks tomorrow for new hires. We have got to get the state out of this business. It is a state it is a business we have proven we cannot be trusted to run. And a lot of the conversation we're having today about property taxes, at the end of the day, the increases we're seeing in property taxes are largely driven by Peasers. Until we get serious as a legislature and the executive on that matter, I think we're going to have great challenges in moving this issue forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just follow up what Representative Lawrence was talking about. The other states that you have there, does that include their pension obligations, or you're not sure? It's just what their average is?
I don't believe so, but I can take a look at that.
Do you know what ours would be percentage-wise if you included that pension?
With relative to the other ones, I can look into that. I don't know if
if
we
you
have
could
those
get me
numbers.
that information so I can dispense it to the committee, I would appreciate it. Great, thank you. Representative Toohill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is, I guess, more for discussion. I was kind of mulling over Representative Daly and her concerns with more low to middle class renters and increasing a personal income tax on them. And I was trying to look at the flip side of it, that maybe home ownership for those individuals would be more realistic when you take away the property tax burden, the school property tax bill, if it's going to be $1,000 a month towards actually owning a home. That is always going to prohibit them from owning a home. And I know we have a lot of federal programs and projects that we can do in our communities to help the low and middle income Pennsylvanians get towards home ownership. So that was just kind of what I was able to come up with from that. I think so when I first saw this bill, when it came out, anything with personal income tax, I think all of us as legislators, we immediately balk at that because we think, we cannot raise the personal income tax, more money on the working men and women, that it's just very difficult to do. But while I have the 93-year-old woman whose husband has died, who's holding on to her home, and at the same time, when I'm always focusing on those senior citizens that are losing their home, I have just as many of these younger people that come in and they had this dream and optimism about home ownership, and it's a complete epic fail in their minds because they just can't do it. So you're really optimistic and you start, and then there's so much financial instability. The property taxes are going up. They end up getting divorced. They lose their home because of that. There's so many issues that it affects families. So I think that this is a really realistic proposal. I really like it. I wish that we would go back and maybe the chairman would bring it up and you could get it out of committee, and then our constituents, so many constituents want House Bill 76, but when you take a deep dive into something like this, I think that they would look at it, and this would be a shift that they would be willing to live with. And then I did have a question for Mr. Keel about, do you have any more information, or are you going to be able to come up with more information for us on just the financial data where we have this PIT, it's $8 to $9 billion, assuming that all 500 school districts opt into this, or persuaded into this new system. And then how can we have it be recession proof or unemployment rate proof, as things decline, that it could be more stable, those numbers, those projections?
Well, I'm not sure I can guarantee it'll be totally recession-proof, but we have a lot of data. We work closely with the Appropriations Committee to come up with it. We have more charts that we can provide you with to show you how the funding will work and be dispersed, and I'm happy to send that to you. I think we're also going to request an IFO study on it just to make sure. But I'll just reiterate, one of the reasons we chose the PIT is because after property taxes, it's going to be as close to stable and steady as you can get as far as state taxes that we can look at go. So it's going to provide increases in revenue generally over time, and you're not going to see the ebbs and flows that you see in some other funding sources that you could look at.
Okay, and then thank you. And my final comment would be from Luzerne County, it was noted we have 2,500 homes that are for sheriff sale. We have declining, property values just plummeting, a ton of blight, urban decay going on. Our school district, we have 12,000 students, and it's going to actually go up now to 13,000 by next year. Like, we're gaining 600 students a year in my school district. And the type of homes that are worth $35,000, $40,000, it's impossible for my school district to tax enough on those types of properties to even remotely educate our students and give them what they deserve. So the zip code argument is there, and it's truly unfair. And this is urgent. Representative Ryan was talking about this. This is urgent. I do believe that it's immoral. I have people that are outliving their spouses, and they're shocked and they're losing their homes because their social security is being cut in half. I have a couple that just had to move in with their children because they outlived their reverse mortgage, and the man was a foster grandparent working for free in the school, and he was a veteran. It was just so hard to see that family go through that. So this is something that's urgent, and that we as a legislature, and I think us and especially the members in the Northeast, that we can all band together and say we have to go back. This is something that I actually came in, it's been a decade now of work on this, and we can't just stand by and continue to watch this happen. So thank you for having this hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. I apologize that you passed your time frame for the meeting I had to go to. Well, if you get in trouble, blame me.
I will.
Tell them to call me. I won't answer the phone.
It's a good move. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Our next testifier and our last is Lisa Schaefer, the Director of Government Relations for the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. And Lisa, I want to thank you for your patience and for allowing us to adjust the schedule. So when you're ready, just introduce yourself and for the record and what.
Sure. Good morning, Chairman O'Neill, members of the committee. My name is Lisa Schaefer. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. I'm in the unique position that our association has not, in fact, taken a position on House Bill 2329, nor does the bill really directly impact our members. So you're probably wondering why I'm sitting here between you and your lunch testifying today. The truth of the matter is that the bill offers a good opportunity for us to talk about how the mechanism, the homestead exclusion that was approved, the expansion that was approved by the voters last fall, could also be useful to counties if they had the ability to also have the resources to implement it, and if we would expand it to include our other local governments. All local governments rely mostly, and in the case of counties, we rely only on the property tax for our general fund tax revenues. So when we're talking about things like increasing costs, decreasing state and federal funding, the only place our counties have to turn is the local property tax payer. Yet over this whole discussion, the phrase property tax reform has come to just mean school property tax reform. We've not been included in the reform efforts over the past several decades. And please don't misunderstand me. We've heard today, we do not deny that the school property tax is by far the largest part of an individual's burden. We do not deny that that is what you hear the most about from your constituents about that burden. But a lot of the arguments that we use to talk about the rationale for school property tax reform really do also apply to the counties. Representative Brown mentioned earlier that we're looking for something that's fair and reasonable for both sides. I think we're really looking for something that's fair and reasonable across our local governments, so that what counties are using to pay for the human services, the emergency management, the election systems, and on, is fair to them as well as fair to the county property tax payer. We say that forcing local governments to rely on property taxes is unfair. It's unfair. A school property taxpayer is a county property taxpayer. They are one and the same individual. So we believe, and I should say too, that counties are not saying we should not be talking about school property tax reform. That's not what we're saying at all. But what we are saying is that counties need to be part of this conversation as well. If we look at what's been proposed for schools in the past, increased sales taxes, increased personal income taxes, if those options go into place and are focused just on schools, that limits probably an option that we can talk about for counties in the future. So that means we really want to talk about real comprehensive property tax reform that brings counties to the table as well. The old adage is, and we've talked about it a little bit here, any financial advisor would tell you, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, but that's essentially what counties have to do at this point. So our members have advocated for many, many years for diversification of their tax base, to have options that they can use to offset their property tax revenues, whether that be an optional sales tax, an optional earned income tax, an optional personal income tax. We realize too that just like an individual who's managing their portfolio, there's no one best mix of taxes for the counties across the board. And so what I've brought for one of the items that was attached to my testimony is we actually, using the best data that we have available, and it's a lot of estimating, so please don't take this as gospel, but we've tried to lay out, looking at the county property tax collections and what a 1% sales PIT or EIT could generate in each county, and what that looks like compared to a county's property tax collections. And then using data from the IFO, we helped them gather some of the assessment data and the homestead data they used in their study for schools last fall. They were able to help us regenerate that data that we could use on a countywide basis, so you could see those yields against the county's aggregate homestead value and see what the shift could look like if we were able to implement a homestead exclusion. The other piece that I also want to talk about here before you today is a conversation about the expanded homestead exclusion. Under the previous standard, and as currently remains in statute, the homestead exclusion is capped at 50% of the median of the entire homesteads in a taxing district. That is a flat rate, which means that a lower value property gets a greater percentage reduction than a higher value property might. But the constitutional amendment was structured, and the House Bill 2329 seems to contemplate moving to a percentage-based system. Now, in this case, I believe the choice is 100% or not, which seems to be the case. But we've done some analysis we wanted to bring before you today, just some idea of what moving from that flat base to a percentage-based system would look like, because in a percentage-based system, everybody will get the same percentage reduction, but that dollar amount that everybody gets will be different based on the value of your property. So this other chart that I've brought probably looks a little bit confusing. So let me just walk you through this just a moment. We actually used real school district data that we got from our county assessment offices. There's a mix of different school districts here. We have some rural districts, some more suburban districts. So for instance, looking at School District A, one of the examples, about 6,000 homestead properties. Their median homestead value is about $53,000. And based on the numbers that we were able to pull from the Department of Education reports, their current exclusion per property is about $15,000. To Representative Daley's question earlier about how that works out, in this particular district, if you added up the entire value of that exclusion, that flat rate across all the properties, it would be about 26% of the total property tax burden across all property owners in this district. So what we did down below in the chart is you can see we have percent reduction in assessed value at 26.6. So if you took the money that you had to do the current homestead exclusion in that district and translated it into a percentage based, you would actually end up having almost 4,000 properties paying more in property taxes than they do under the current system. And please, that's anything from pennies up to, I think it's about 120, I think it was, per property. You'd also have about 45 properties who currently don't pay the property tax because the exclusion is more than the value of their property, who would be paying property taxes for the first time. Almost 150 properties would be paying double what they currently pay. And then on the other side, you'd have about 1,400 higher value properties that would receive a reduction of at least 10% in their property tax bill. So what we did for each of those districts is we broke down what a school district could do if they shifted to a percentage-based exclusion based on the money they currently have to implement the exclusion. But we've also then shown, so if they had enough money to do a 50% exclusion, and if they had enough money to do a 75% exclusion, what that would look like across the board. So you get an idea that if you were to do an exclusion that was not fully 100%, we have not taken a position on whether that shift should or should not happen, whether it should be 100% or allow for something less than. But I at least wanted to show you the work that we've done to make sure that folks understand the implications of transferring from one system to another, because I think there's some misconception that going up to 100%, that anything less will result in reductions for every property owner, and it's really a different shift that you can see there. When I first started, I mentioned that the expanded homestead exclusion could have benefits for counties if we had access to them and the resources to implement them. Right now, few, if any, I'm really not aware of any counties right now that are able to offer a homestead exclusion, simply because the Constitution also says you can't increase the millage rate on other properties to pay for them. So lacking any other source of revenue, counties have no ability to offer a homestead exclusion. So that's why one of the reasons we're advocating for increasing options for counties so that they can offer these types of property tax reductions for their taxpayers as well. I'll just close by saying, property tax reform, it's clearly a very complicated issue. Decades of work and discussions and hearings and legislation have shown that very clearly. But Pennsylvania's taxpayers need our local governments and our state government to come together to find a solution to these, and I think our counties are ready and willing to sit at the table to be part of these discussions. And as we run, the system from assessment through tax claims, any technical expertise that we can offer you about the system, we are more than happy to do so.
Great, thank you. I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
You're referring to the 45 homes that would be paying.
Mm-hmm.
In what form are you saying they would be paying school property taxes?
So under the scenario in School District A, if the school district were to switch to a percentage-based system with no additional revenue,
Right.
there are 45 properties right now in that district, and I don't have obviously the data in front of me,
Right,
but
yeah.
they would only get a 26% reduction in their property tax bill in a percentage-based system with that same amount of funding, where currently the flat rate is higher than the value of their home, so they do not have to pay property taxes.
That is depending on what the percentage is.
Correct. And I'm
So if
saying,
it's 100%, they wouldn't be paying any of that.
correct.
Okay.
That's why we did not put, obviously 100% mitigates the need for another column, but
Right.
just with showing the impact of if there is not sufficient funding for a full 100% exclusion,
Great. Okay.
what that looks like.
Thank you for clarifying that. Is Representative Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question based upon your testimony. Are you saying that the counties would be more interested in just doing away with the property tax system as well, completely, and would want?
I think that the counties are looking for options to have a full diversification. There are some that I think would want to eliminate completely their property tax. I think there are others who would still want to keep some level of property tax as part of the
Or some
overall
type of mix. Yeah.
Based on, I mean, like, they have different demographics, different mix of commercial and residential properties,
Because
economics.
in any of these scenarios we talk about, it's different where what part of the state you're in, and I understand that, but that is interesting. I never really thought about counties wanting to eliminate it as well, which it does make sense, I guess. Because that also would eliminate the need, the constant discussion of assessment or reassessment then, would it not?
As long as either the school districts, the counties, or the municipalities still have a property tax, you would need an assessment system, because that is the basis for all three of the property tax systems across the board.
But if a county would also have the homestead exclusion, or ability for a homestead exclusion, then your only assessment would be on business properties, is that?
If I understand correctly how it would have to work, because the exclusion means that you take the assessed value and you exclude a certain value from it, you would still have to know what every property's value is in
That's
order
just true.
to be able to exclude a value from it.
That's true. All right, thank you.
And wouldn't that be another constitutional question on the ballot for the counties?
No, the constitutional question applied to all taxing districts.
Oh, it did.
So it's just a matter of getting the legislation that expands it
Gotcha,
to everybody
yeah.
and the resources to implement it.
All right, glad to make that clear. Anybody else have any more questions? Thank you very much. And again, my apologies for making you wait till last. I guess that wraps up the hearing from our testifiers. Do our two prime sponsors have anything they want to finish up with?
I just want to thank everyone for coming out and all the testifiers, and it certainly opens discussion. And I know Representative Daley, we all had the same questions, like Representative Brown said. We're all concerned for all the homeowners and all the taxpayers, but I think when you look at the issue that we hear most about, the homeowners are struggling, especially the seniors, but all the homeowners. So we'll keep the discussion going, and hopefully the chairman can have another meeting and hopefully vote the bill out so we can see some progress on it. So thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you. Yes. No matter what you do, when you're changing, like when we were doing the special ed funding formula and the basic ed funding formula, you have special interest groups that come in and they're only worried about their one group, and the rest of the group be damned, and everybody else just take care of us. And so no matter what you do, whether it's changing a funding formula or changing the way we're taxing, there's always going to be winners and losers. And I think the idea is to minimize the losers and maximize the winners. And I think that's the most important thing that we're going to try to get through, especially with property taxes. So with that, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Monroe County Emergency Services for hosting us today, and I wish everybody a safe weekend, and I understand that it's going to get cooler tomorrow, so it'll be a little nicer weekend. And by the way, go Eagles. Thanks.